Hello, 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 and welcome back to a new episode of Walk With Me, the podcast. I am your host. I am Marie-Eve Bédard, and today I have a very special guest that does very special work, and I am above and beyond excited to have her with me because like what she does and the way that she does it, and it's so outside of the mainstream of what we're used to see, but at the same time, it's so in line with how we were moving into this world through stories, through generational stories, through how the psyche works, how like so I'm just so excited. Welcome, Melissa Kim Corter.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. I feel like we're long lost friends just meeting each other here for the first time. And what a joy to be able to come here and talk about these mysterious, unique things that we all are in touch with, but maybe haven't thought more deeply about the stories in our lives, the shadow aspect of the human mind, the hidden dimension of who we are. And I just love the opportunity to be able to explore that. So thank you.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. I do feel like a really deep connection. And it was actually kind of a online, we fall in love with people online. And this is where I always say like online has this upside and downside. And this is truly one of the times where you fall in love with somebody, you start to follow and you're like, oh my God, she speaks to my soul and to the way that I seen this world and navigated this world, but felt alone. Cause I was like, am I alone thinking this, like, cause I just love shadow work. And we're going to be diving into that. I didn't know that I was doing shadow work like with myself. I had no idea. And I just love Carl Jung's work, and for me it got into a deeper dimension when I moved here in the Black Forest, near where, Carl Jung and all the fairy tales. And when you live in the Black Forest, there's an understanding of the fairy tales and where it comes from, like that is so much deeper. And I just love it, So
Oh, that's amazing. You're like living my dream in a whole other way. That's so fantastic. Like, how can you not feel in touch, right, with that mysterious quality of nature and like a black forest living in such a, like, even the name alone is invoking this sort of cool mystical energy. Like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. I love that.
I just love it. And, the story of us moving here is just like so weird in so many ways because my husband studied here like 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
My husband is German born, but he moved to Canada when he was 5, but he came back in Germany to do his apprenticeship. And he lived here in where we live right now, like for 3 years. So when we visited his parents and his family, like back in 2009, he brought me here for one day. And within like the first hour, I was looking, like I was taking pictures and I was looking online. Like my husband's like, why is it taking you so long to take pictures? And I'm like, no, I'm actually shopping for like apartments to rent and houses too. And it was like, what? I felt so deeply connected with this place in a way that I didn't quite understand back then. And that I don't think that I'm still fully understanding, but like there's a deeper connection that I have with here that is so fantastic. So, can you tell us what is shadow? What do you do? Can you go ahead and introduce yourself to begin with?
Yes. Oh my God, such a loaded question. What do I do? But thank you for the opportunity. So I'm Melissa Kim Corter. I'm into depth psychology. I'm a death investigator. Like there's a lot of interesting things that I do that mix the hidden side of the mind, the psyche, the shadow. And there's a lot of misconception around the shadow, but I've always been someone drawn to the darker elements of life and these interesting thresholds of life and death. And I really believe there's beauty in those experiences, and that in intense circumstances and situations we may not be able to find beauty, but if we look long enough we can find meaningful experiences that bring hope and healing and connection. And so working with shadow is this mysterious thing because we can't quite locate it. We can't say, oh, look, there's your shadow. It's located here within the mind. It's more of this field that we tap into. And so my perspective on shadow, a lot of it has been informed through my personal life experiences, just like you were sharing your move and this location you found yourself in, and sort of backtracking through my life and making these connections to go, oh my gosh, I was actually working with shadow at that time, or I was integrating these hidden aspects, bringing them to consciousness. And so a lot of this work comes through the lens of depth psychology, which is one of the many psychologies that believes in this unconscious part of the mind. And then that's layered with Jungian theory, which ties directly into the unconscious. And a lot of the terminology around shadow work is directly linked to Carl Jung. He actually coined the term the shadow self. And so when I speak to that, that's kind of the framework that I use, or that I sort of see through as I do the work. I help people tap into and look at the material, the matter, the things that are going on within that are keeping them from living their lives in more harmony, with more connection, with more authenticity. And often that revolves around looking at the things that we want to turn away from, processing the material that's sort of just sitting there waiting in shadow in this field that we all have. This it's sort of like a container within us. It's not inherently good or bad. It just holds things for us in this sacred way that can sometimes be frustrating, welcomed, unnerving, magical. It's everything. And that's what I love about shadow is there's a lot of misconception that it's wrong, that it's bad. So essentially when we say shadow, what we're dealing with is this field that is beneath our conscious awareness that contains everything that is suppressed, repressed, or oppressed. Sometimes we consciously push things down and the shadow holds it for us. Other times it automatically happens. This is what repression is. We don't even realize we're pushing things down. The other side of this that I find a lot of joy in, and this is like the magical quality of shadow, is that it is beauty and grace. And it is also all the things that we have yet to integrate in our personality. So when you're even talking about this lovely place that you visited and you have this knowing, I need to be here, I need to live here, this is for me. We could even say that those desires were activated from shadow and brought into consciousness. And because once you experience the land and you look around and you feel this sense of home, you're integrating this hidden part that was not known to the conscious mind and bringing it forward. So those are a lot of different ways I work with shadow and help people attune to this really ominous hidden side of themselves without fear, without that sense of dread. Like, what am I going to discover? What am I going to find? Instead, it's like, well, we can get curious. We can become open to what magic is there. What do we not know about ourselves yet? That could be so beautiful and profound if we just let ourselves get a little closer. And the way that I do that with people is often through the use of fairy tales and their personal stories and narratives.
I I'm getting goosebumps because for me, this is what I'm talking about. For me, like we spend so much time trying to figure out ourselves externally, figuring ourselves like through like our strengths and like I feel like we're overlooking this incredible treasure that we're carrying within just because we think that it's gonna like it's the Pandora's box, right? Like right? But
Yes.
but the thing is, and we think that because we're not opening that door, that it's not leading our lives, but it is. In ways that we don't even like can begin to fathom, can begin to even so when you're talking about magic, when you're talking about like that, for me, it's like really like diving in that magical treasure that I'm carrying that I can move through, that I can integrate, that I can bring forward in the consciousness, right? So I can make informed decisions and align even further in my own way of being, right? Like so it's really cool that we're having this tool And yet we're not really talking about it.
Right. It's so I think a lot of it's just so great too, because you're tapping into all these, like, these metaphors and these things I would use in the fairy tale language, like the forbidden door. There's a fairy tale called Bluebeard where the bride is forbidden from entering this one room, and this one room essentially contains all the secrets that are not to be revealed. And so there's these cautionary tales that were a lot of times they were directed at women. They definitely
Mhm,
speak to, all masculine, feminine principles for sure, but a lot of times they were kind of targeting, women, and they were to keep them from being curious. Don't go in there. You're not allowed to look. And yet, if we can recognize that curiosity is a gift and intuition provides us with discernment, we'll know when not to look, when to step
mm,
back from investigating something that may not be in our best interest. But there is something around that Pandora's box and the forbidden room and our curiosity toward things that are hidden, that are often labeled as dangerous. The unknown catches such a reputation for being filled with monsters and demons and frightening things. And part of that has to do with the orientation of our ego. The ego is a part of the psyche, is essential. It gets such a bad reputation. People are like, get rid of the ego. We need to squash the ego or kill it off. But essentially, it helps us to have boundaries, to know who we are, as far as like me versus someone else in a healthy way. It's intended to. But as we work with the ego, it loses its fixed position on the outer world, meaning our roles, our status, our what we do in the world, how important we think we are. We're humbled through life, and basically broken down in ways to go, I wonder what it would be like to live from the soul versus the expectation of society. So I think this idea also that we're kind of speaking to in this roundabout way, which is so fun, is that we're allowed to venture into this territory that's so ominous, and we have to sort of almost reprogram ourselves to find the beauty, the grace, the trust in our instincts, our intuition to navigate the unknown. That we can do that we will not be punished or criticized or killed off by the king, in these different fairy tales. So I think that speaks to a lot of this too, is some of us are afraid. We've been taught,
mm.
don't go there, don't look there, don't ask too much. And so now we're saying, well, let's go there, let's tap into the magic, let's see what's there. And there can be this natural resistance or this sort of feeling of like authority might reign in the back of our minds, like, oh, you're not allowed, you don't have permission, you've been told don't go there. So I think we're like dancing on that fine line, and it's so fun to do that.
It is fun, and it's the ego is we it does have a bad rep, and we tend to forget that that the ego has a big job because the ego is the mediator with everything, right? Like with whatever, like the survival part and the conditioning and all our beliefs and everything. And when we're talking about like higher self, it's like just another dimension of the ego that I always think of. Like you can be in the forest and like have all the trees in front of you and like in this thing, but when you're stepping out and you're calling into yourself, it's for me it's just like this column that actually allows me to move up and see the forest so I can go back. And so I just love that you said this because it does have a bad rep. And I think that when we think about killing the ego, like it doesn't make any sense because it actually is the crux or the turning point of everything since it mediates. I think that we just have to transcend whatever the messages that we're getting to help the ego mediate in the highest possible way for our own good, right? So that's
Yes.
and when you're talking about curiosity, like everybody said, like when you say curiosity, there's always like curiosity killed the cat. And it's like, well, yeah,
Right.
and what's the other part of that?
That's
And
right.
the truth brought it back to life, but we never hear that part, right? Like it's always curiosity killed the cat. Don't be too curious. And it's like, no, but the truth brought it back to life, meaning that once we actually step out of that confined whatever, like and be curious, there's a lot of things that are going to die for the other part of the cycle to live and to, through the truth. So I just love this. And I'm going to segue into like my personal favorite um story. Like, and I was obsessed. Like, when I mean I was obsessed, like when I was a little girl, I'm a little bit older than, like, we didn't have any like on demand whatever thing. So we were going to the video store. And we were going to the video store, and my mom was saying, like, Joe, just go choose your movie. And I was always going for Alice in Wonderland every single time. So much that one day my mom said, okay, you can't, we just brought it back. Like, so like we would go on the Friday night, for example, we would bring back on the Saturday Alice in Wonderland. And then I would just wait in front of it for a little sticker for the employee to come back and to put the sticker so I can take the sticker and go back to the cash. So my mom was like, and it was like back in the days where you couldn't buy the movie. Like that was just like, why didn't your mom buy the movie? You could not buy the movie. Like, it was not something that was like mainstream, like. And I'm I actually, like, my mom said one day, like, you can't, no, you have to choose another movie. And you know what I chose? Mary Poppins.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was alternating every single weekend between Alice in Wonderland and Mary Poppins.
Oh, I love this. That's so amazing. I did the same thing, different movies, but oh, you just brought back so many memories because that's how it worked. You had to wait and you couldn't buy the movie. And my parents would like pick something else, pick something else. I resonate with that. That's lovely.
I just love so, but Alice in Wonderland was my all-time favorite. It is still my all-time favorite, and it actually grew with me because as I grew, like, myself, like, when I say grew, I mean like personal growth, professional growth, like all these aspects. Sorry, it's always been with me because there's so many things. Like, it's a classic of the literature for a reason. It's a criticism on society for a reason. There were so many life codes in Alice in Wonderland for a reason, right? Like, so
Yes.
I would just love us to talk about this because I feel like it would give a good example of what your work is all about and why you use stories. Like, no, Alice in Wonderland is not necessarily a fairy tale, like, per se, but it still has a lot of archetypes that are really interesting to explore,
Yeah.
right?
It has the layering, the essentials. You've got the narrative. You've got these characters that have intentions and goals. This is the beautiful thing about literature, movies, film, things that have a development of character where we get to really understand them. We get a felt sense. We start to see how they operate. And even if they're completely made up, it doesn't matter because they still speak to the imaginal qualities within our own psyches. We can resonate, we can relate, we can have sympathy, we get angry at the villains, or we identify with the villains, or both. And it offers so much to the unspoken things that we sense, we feel in community, in culture, in family, in all different ways, and often gives voice to the things that are hard for us to talk about, to express, to articulate. Sometimes it gives a form to something that we feel on a really deep level, but haven't found our way to communicate it. And that's something that I see a lot in these different tales. And then when you mention the archetypes, there's this structure, this container, and it might be the one character that is this sort of structure, and they have this layering of personality just like we do as humans. And so we might identify with those qualities of that character. And what I love about this is what makes it different also from an archetype versus a stereotype. An archetype, we can look at that one character and all of us can find things that we maybe agree on, disagree on, but there's something there we're relating to, we're experiencing. Versus a stereotype is very fixed. It's a fixed symbol. It sort of had these rules that say it's only this way. You can only experience it this way. But an archetype, it opens up like the symbol. I think of it as like a zip folder on your computer. It can hold all these different things. And then you click on that and it opens and you just are brought into all this different territory. So I love that. And I love that Alice in Wonderland, like what a powerful archetype. I'd be curious if you have certain quality. Is it the whole story? Is there something that stands out to you that really would grip you in that character?
Well, I there's a very strong and everybody knows me like when the moon is in the crescent, they actually like my husband makes a point when he goes out with the dogs and he comes back, he's like, "Did you know that it's like that type like that there's like we can see the crescent moon."
Oh.
And that was like my mother passed away like 15 years ago and that was like a link to like each other that was really powerful because from the childhood because the Cheshire cat was really the like a bigger voice of like where it connects us to something that is greater and at the same time shows how much when we're so fumbling with like the day-to-day thing like that we think it's so important right like it's
Yeah.
that scene of Alice she's like I'm trying to find the way or my like where should I go and he says oh like where do you want to go and she says I don't know well it doesn't matter where you're going right like so it's this it's bringing that other side which is like bringing like another point of view, another perspective to how much of what we're doing is ridiculous when we look at the big scheme of thing, right? And so the Cheshire cat is the like the really the archetype of that, but the whole story of Alice in Wonderland is really that. And I think that as a child, I really and when we think about the time when in our childhood development where we start to when the parent says we're acting out right like we're
Right.
acting out because it's the only way that children at that point have to express things that they don't have another way of expressing right so when we're trying to tell them no you have to stop acting out instead of having this other like this other perspective of like that child in their development doesn't know yet how to express
Right.
feels most likely like Alice in Wonderland, where everything is upside down and they don't know, they don't have like a footing on anything. So they will act out because they don't know how to do this. And the interesting thing is when we moved to Germany, I felt right back there.
Uh,
I truly felt as an adult right back in Alice in Wonderland where I thought that this was going to be like this way and then I got here and like I did not have a footing and I thought that it was interesting for me to revisit that on another level as an adult and revisit all of that because the story is she goes in and a lot of us know the Disney version right but when we look at the book like she and I just think that Thing Burton did such an incredible job. When she goes back, she knows the rules. She has learned the code, and she can actually not only operate, but she becomes the hero. She becomes the one that is. So I think that it's interesting in all of it, right? And it's so intemporal, and it's so intemporal in the like the eras, but it's also intemporal for me in my own life, right? Like this kind of like, and how we go in the rabbit hole of that treasure and we actually find the codes and we reorganize and we incorporate it in our lives and integrate it and move forward and become this hero of our own life.
yes. Oh, this is so good. I love this so much. You're touching on so many critical points too. What was coming to me is the idea of disorientation. We sometimes don't realize how purposeful being disoriented is when we don't have our footing. In depth psychology, we would call that liminality, that space of in between. You're not who you were. You don't know yet, maybe who you are becoming. There's glimmers of both, there's a little bit of the past. There's some insight, maybe perhaps into the future. We're not quite rooted in this next place that we're deepening into. So we can feel disoriented. We can feel as if we're falling, we're tumbling down. A lot of times in fairy tales, it's like you fall into the well or you're lost in the woods. You're, disoriented. And I love your going back and forth between the child and the adult because something that's so amazing and powerful is that the child has this understanding. Maybe I don't know if this is conscious or not, but almost like there's purpose in this
Mm.
crazy, wild, wacky, disorienting place. The adult, many I should say, not everyone, but I see this a lot with the adults that I work with. They sometimes want to act like they aren't disoriented, or they want to avoid this disorientation because it can trigger this lack of control, this fear of what's going on. I don't understand this. It's unknown. But there's something about the beautiful way where you allowed yourself to be present. That doesn't mean it's not without discomfort or challenge or struggle, but that's just such a beautiful way to demonstrate how these tales, these stories can give voice to something that many of us as adults, we forget our magic. We're out of touch with that. We, like you even started our conversation with, it's like we have these rules and these sort of ways, and we just forget to be in touch with this imaginal quality that it contains so much for us. You were using it like the seriousness of life, and how uh, looking at that crescent moon and the interconnectedness and the relationship with you and your mother, and it really puts things in perspective to go, this other thing over here, why is this such a big deal? Why am I being so serious about this? And I think disorientation, it's kinda like, one of my professors once said when I had started going down this rabbit hole of my own with depth psychology, had said, when we do this work, sometimes it's as if your psyche is a living room. And when you go through these changes or you have these things happen, it's almost as if somebody steps into your living room, moves all the furniture around. Like, it's all your stuff. It's your pieces of furniture. It's the things but they're in a completely different pattern. And now you're bumping into things going, why is this here? Where did this come from? I forgot all about that. So that disorientation, it can really be activating for us. But what I love and how you just demonstrated this just from your sharing is like, there can be purpose in that disorientation, and we may not love every moment of it, but if we can turn it into such an essential part of the journey, we might catch our breath a little more as we're tumbling. We might realize that we're suspended and supported by some unseen force, perhaps, regardless of what we believe in. As we're tumbling, there's something innate within us that knows the way, that will catch us, that will reorient us toward where we're meant to be. And this is so great too, because in the formation of ego strength, the ego kind of goes through this death rebirth process. And so, as it's reorienting from the outer world to the inner world, that can feel disorienting. So, even the idea of tumbling down these rabbit holes, it's what if we looked at that as if, wow, this part of me that was really fixated on something outside of myself is now being pulled in toward leading with soul. And I'm experiencing it, my adult mind, as disorientation, confusion, being lost. But that deeper part of me is like, no, this is your unfolding. This is this is inherently within you, and it's okay. And you'll figure it out, and you'll land once again. You'll find your roots once again. So I love that Alice in Wonderland. Like, that's so potent. That's such a potent um, I mean, there's so many layers to that, but that's one big potent part that just stood out to me as you were talking.
I just love it because, in the world where we're giving in a lot of our power externally, you were just, mentioning, and we are trying to control things that are out of our control, it is extremely challenging to let go of the grip, right? And it's been years now, and I can, just recently, there's something that was happening, with my dog, and the human wants to grip, the human wants to control, the human wants answers, right? Like, and I think it's just beautiful when we actually can catch ourselves in there and then say, like, hold on a second, like, the the end result doesn't matter. No matter what happens, I'll be okay because I have the internal resources to navigate this.
Yes.
And in the world, and especially right now, I just see it, and I see it like just you just go on social media, but I see it in my container. I see, like, um we live in a dysregulated society. Like our nervous system are like all over the place. And this is what happened as well when we moved here. I was so far off in like outside of my comfort zone. I didn't have any footing, right? Like just even in the dynamic, like just to give you an example, even in the dynamic of our relationship, where there was a whole bunch of things that I was taking care of, whether it was like insurance or like everything that has to do like with those things that my husband was not. We are a very divide and conquer team. And when we arrived here, everything was in German. Like I can order at the restaurant, but I cannot read a insurance contract. And he was like, I've never read an insurance contract. So this refooting, right? Like when we're thinking about after a loss, for example, where the dynamic changes between you and the other people's relationship after a big change, like moving here, it really impacts the relationship that you have, because it challenges them as well into the unknown. And it's even worse when the unknown is not something that we initiated, right? Like for me, it was challenging, but I initiated this and I was like, okay, like I'll find my way. And I trusted that I was going to find my way. It really expanded me in ways where at some point, like there were points where I thought that I was literally coming out of the seams, but I actually found so much strength in that. But when the change is imposed on us, when we are not leading the change, when we are actually like, it actually takes a minute for us to say, like, listen, like, instead of saying, I wish that was not happening, I wish they would stop doing that, and like re-putting the external fault elsewhere, instead of saying like, hold on a second, like where do I have the control? Where can I actually really reel back into myself in this Alice in Wonderland world where we're like, what is going on here, right? Like, so that's why I just love the conversation around this, and how I've been, and I think I've been using it a little bit here and there. Last year I did the March Madness, where like the entire month I was like going in Alice in Wonderland, but there's something really interesting in that particular story for me, that you were saying there's so many archetypes that we can really anchor in something for us. But in all of reality, like when we're looking at different fairy tales, and that's one thing that I hear in Germany, stories and fairy tales are part of the culture, not just for kids. It's really every step of the, like, all adults, like, stories are so important. And it got me really thinking about this when I was in one of my I'm training as a death midwife, and we were having this discussion like together, and they were all bringing in, oh, it's like this story, like in this story, and I was like, everything, like, are their concepts were all in very different stories, but like they're classic here. And I find that there are more classics here than we are used to in North America in general.
Yes.
Do you feel that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of the fairy tales are from, they have roots in Germany and Slavic, and like they're all over the world. There's a lot of and I think a lot of that also has to do with some of the publishings, of like the Grimm's tales and things like that. So they draw on these different sources that happen to be in a certain region where it became extremely popular. But I love that. I love that it's still intact in that way. It hasn't been watered down. It's still relevant. And I think, here in the US, storytelling, it's valued, but not, I wouldn't say in the same way. It's a different, I feel like we've taken these old tales and kind of watered them down, and we've shifted a little bit more into that stereotypical versus archetypal. That's what I sense here. It's a little more, there's people that relate deeply with what we're saying, but there's more people, I think, that don't recognize the power of story in this way. And I do think it has a lot to do with the ego and how it's rewarded in especially in the United States. Our egos are just rewarded based on effort, achievement, production. And so the imaginal, the intuitive, I think those are assets that other cultures, other countries seem to embrace a little more. For some reason here, it's really kind of it's been a bit more dismissed, that side of things. It's we don't take it as seriously. We don't look at intuition or symbolism as structures that are necessary. I think we lean on the sciences too much. We look toward the
Mm.
logical too much. So I think that's part of why it might be so different depending on where we go, what we experience. But I love that. I love that you're in these places where they're just speaking those stories, reminding that keeps them alive, and showing the relevance and how they are alive. They're not just these made up things that are hollow words. Like they have a life to them. It's something we continue to learn from and to activate. Parts of us are activated as we hear them, as we share them, as we recognize them in each other. It's alive, it's real. And that's such a beautiful thing to have, to be surrounded by that. It's lovely. I
Mm.
can't even imagine. It's so
Oh yeah,
amazing.
it's really cool. It's a very it enhances the experience, right, of being here in the Black Forest, and to have all these stories. And when you look at, because I, in Germany, like there's High German that is spoken, and then when I say High German, but like there's all these dialects, right, all through Germany. And it's funny because when we arrived here, we were living in a country, in a city, and when we moved afterwards, after 5 months, we moved here where we are. And like, I was like, what kind of German are they talking? Like, they're still speaking German, but there's so many dialects. And when you look at stories as well, when the Grimms, they went through all over the place to collect all those stories, and then they wrote them down with the most commonalities, right, from those stories. But all these stories were different from one place to the other, even if um the thread, there was a common thread, which they actually. So I think that it's very interesting that you're saying, like, stories are a living, breathing piece of who we are, as we transmit them, as we receive them, as we incorporate them in our own lives, right? So that's just so amazing, amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to talk about was, and going back to that treasure and the monster. Let's go back to the monster. um there Like, in our mind, we want to squash the monster. Like, we want to, like, the monster to go away. And this is a conversation that we were having again, where when we're talking about, anxiety, and how to deal with anxiety in a dysregulated nervous system, we tend to see, like, the monster as being something that doesn't have a purpose. Like, we want it to go away. We want it to go, like, we don't want to. And we were having this conversation where, like, there's a lot of different ways of dealing with the monster. Befriending the monster is not the one that comes on, like, it's not even on the top 100 usually, right? Like, when we're talking about befriending the monster, we're the monster, and I'm air quoting here for the ones that are listening, has a message that is so incredibly, like, important. That's why they keep it. And when you were talking about symbolism, when we're talking about dreams, when we're talking about the unconscious that comes and repeats, so until we understand what the message is. Befriend the monster is not one of them. And when we're talking about movies, Monster Inc. is really doing a good job at this, right? Like, where we're like, we don't like this screaming, we don't want the monster. And then when we understand that we can work together with that monster for a purpose, so we can all move on and integrate in our lives in a healthy way, then it's not so scary to actually look under the bed or inside the closet.
Oh, I love this. What comes to me is even thinking about what monsters did back in the day, we could say. Um, Monsters were seen as omens, as messengers. And it's interesting because the monster wasn't the problem itself. It was the foretelling of something. It was trying to bring something forward, a message, a warning to the people to say, hey, pay attention to this. And I think it's interesting that what many of us have done, depending, of course, on culture and where we live, what we're oriented toward, we started to literalize the monster, blame the monster, project onto the monster, condemn the monster, demonize the monster. And all of us have different variations of what monster even is. It reminds me of pathologizing. You know, if we have a symptom, if we have a something out of balance, instead of seeing this, like you're saying, as a messenger, possibly, or some type of communication, some type of symbolic way of engaging, we will blame the thing and try to get rid of that thing. How do I get rid of this symptom? Instead of how do I understand what is being delivered here? What's being shown to me? What am I afraid of? What am I not looking at? There's a million different things we could see through that lens. But it's interesting how I see this a lot too, even in the other side of my career has a lot to do with studying and talking about psychopathy and narcissism and things. And even with psychopathy, we get hyper fixated on psychopaths as these creatures, humans that don't feel, and what's wrong with them? Is it their brain? Is it how they were raised? And they're also described as monsters. And I think a lot of this kind of circles around the same ideas where I think we are beginning to finally understand that it doesn't serve us to put people or circumstances or situations into boxes and make them good or bad, evil or what have you. I think we are really being forced to see the layers, the dynamics, the nuance of these experiences, and attune ourselves more deeply with our instincts so we can ask different questions. Not to say every monster should be our friend or sit at our table with us, but at the same time, there are some things that we thought were a monster that weren't, and we can then shift that relationship to what it is. And we can see this symbolically and say, maybe a monster is a thought, something that is just overwhelming us, that is derailing us, that's causing harm. A monster can be a symptom of the body, where the body is speaking up, saying, hey, something's out of balance. Anxiety, depression, all of these different types of things that are often labels, not that they aren't valid concerns of deeper patterns and some type of imbalance, some type of communication. But I recently heard somebody talk about depression, and I thought this was so beautiful. They weren't being dismissive of the difficulty of the darkness, the depth, the struggle of what depression can be like and feel like. But they were like, what if we just got rid of the word depression and we thought of it as a visitation from like a goddess called Melancholia? And I was like, oh, that's interesting to think about. Not that we want to live in relationship with certain states or experiences, because that's not healthy either. But what if this is a visitation, a message, a symbol, a signal? Would it shift how we see a monster? I often will working with my clients, I will use, instead of the word monster, I might use the word ghost, like some type of unfinished business. What is the unfinished business here? What's haunting us? What's haunting our psyche? What won't let us go? What won't we let go of? That's time to, so I love this entire dialogue because I think it's bringing us back to this imaginal quality to wonder again. And a lot of us, we stopped wondering and asking questions like, I wonder what that means. I wonder what's behind that behavior, that action, that symptom. We go to our phones, our devices, and we look it up. We Google the thing. It's like, what would happen if we just step back from that a little bit and wonder, got into our curiosity? Because that too is like a muscle. And I really do believe if we don't exercise that type of symbolic muscle within us, the psyche speaks in symbols. This is why dreams are so incredible to work with. But I do think we can, and I'm not going to say it necessarily goes away, but I think we can lose touch with that quality, and literalize these forms. And then we fear them, even though we have this power And I think that power has a lot to do with the curiosity of how we approach these things. But it's almost as if we are blind to that power. And so we take the easier, what we think might be the easier route, which is I'm going to diagnose this thing so I can take something to make it go away. Now, I like to say I'm not anti-medication or I'm not anti any of that. I think that there are medications, there are different types of medicine that are life-saving to people and can keep people from suffering and experiencing unnecessary suffering and things of that nature. But I think if they also employ that imaginal quality, they might discover the root of some of those things while they're treating and kind of working with it that way. So I love the idea of monsters in general because it just opens up all this other territory.
I there's two things that actually were brought up while you were talking. One was all the layers that you were talking about, the layers of the monster, but and we're seeing this more and more. Like I remember the watching the reruns of we just recently watched one of the recent Batman movies,
Mm.
and I saw it when it came out on a plane going to Puerto Vallarta last year, but I actually told my husband it would be interesting to watch, and when you're looking at the latest Joker, right? Like and all the Marvel movies, we love Guardians of the Galaxies, right? One of the like there's layers of heroes, and I remember like we were watching when I was a little girl, we were watching like the Batman wang wang wang, like it was like
Ow.
clearly like, and
Yeah.
even in the first movies with the Michael Keaton, like we rewatched all of them because we had like a Tim Burton like 2 weeks rewatching thing last fall. It was very black and white. It was very like right or wrong. It was very, but when we're looking at all these layers, that maybe we actually we don't, because some people, let me real listen. Some people think that by not doing the black and white, by trying to understand all these layers, we're condoning whatever the behavior is.
Mm.
And I don't think that we are doing that unless we actually like are trying to like excuse the other person. But I think that understanding all those layers can bring a lot of forgiveness and self-forgiveness for us not to be black and white, right? Like, and
Right.
if we think in our storyline that we're the villain all the time, like what is actually the shift? Because there's not a lot of things that are shifting from the hero to the villain or the villain to the hero, right? Like there's this cohabitation of light and shadow that doesn't exist without the other. Like, so I that's why I love the conversation about shadow work, because there's no light without the shadow, there's no shadow without the light. So when we learn how to understand all that and harmonize that in a sense, and I'm not saying like harmonize like harmony, but I'm just
Right.
saying like how do we integrate that further and further into ourselves and move in the direction that we are choosing every single moment, instead of being stuck typecast in those stereotypes that we actually really like to put ourselves or other people, allowing us like ourselves to evolve and to change and to make mistakes or experiment or whatever. There is a lot of freedom in there, and that's what
Yes.
I love about how we're evolving in in the culture of the movies. But when we bring it back to what does it mean in my life, what does it mean in our interaction with the other people? Now at the end of the day, like we can choose like, okay, like this I can understand the other person, I'm not available for that, and move in another direction. That's a different story. That's like a second step. But to really typecast people, whether it's in roles in movies, or typecast them in our lives, is a very big disservice to our own understanding of what it is to be human, right?
Yes. Oh, I love how you just articulated that. I think this is why so many struggle to understand these really difficult concepts around monsters, around even the word evil will strike up all different things for people. I had this really beautiful experience. This was a little over a year ago. And I was working on this part of my dissertation where I was just getting really frustrated I felt like I was hitting a brick wall. And I'm like, why? What am I getting at? What am I trying to say? And it wasn't coming to me. And so I was speaking to one of my professors. I was on campus at school, and it was suggested that we go for a walk for one of our gatherings. So instead of meeting in the classroom, he was like, why don't you guys go wander, go into the garden, go sit with yourselves? And so I did that. And I was getting nowhere by trying to force what I was trying to figure out and get to, right? I wanted to get to the crux of this thing. What is the nucleus of my point? And I wasn't getting anywhere. And so I just decided to wander in the garden. And I wandered in the garden, and all of a sudden I just started writing these one word this I was kind of capturing the energy in like one word statements. And the first word was scared. And I started to think, am I scared? I don't feel scared. And then underneath that, I wrote sacred. And my eyes were going back and forth, back and forth. I'm like, the same letters. They're the same letters, scared and sacred. Then I did it again, and it was evil. And I'm like, ooh, right? I had this little reaction like, oh, that's not what I'm trying to work with. And then under that, I wrote veil. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? This is interesting. And I started really playing around with those different words and feeling into them in a safe, creative manner and exploration. And realized that when I even think about what do I think is something that's evil, what it usually comes down to me is something unfathomable that maybe a person has done to another person. It's usually got a human quality to it, which maybe not for everyone, but for me, I was like, there's a very human quality. And then I thought, well, what if there is just, and this comes back to what you're saying about we can investigate to become informed. We don't have to permit certain behaviors. We don't have to permit certain injustices and things of that nature through our investigation by saying people are very nuanced. We don't have to not hold people accountable simply because we are understanding them more. But when I was doing this little exercise, the reason I bring it up is it started to shift how I saw things that I used to never at all want to look at or confront. And it allowed me to see how the word evil in itself was often a projection.
Mm.
It's a part of me going, this is too much. I can't understand it. I don't want to go there. I'm going to project onto the thing, whatever it might be, the person, the behavior, an action, a circumstance, because it brings me to a place within myself that I don't like so quickly. So it's actually a defense. And I thought, isn't that interesting? It's an ego defense. So even how we encounter certain material, how we think about it, no, that doesn't mean we welcome it in all the time or that we have to study these things or look at terrible things or spend all of our time engaging with that kind of material or what have you. But I do think it's helpful for us to explore things that we label and to become curious why and ask that question. If I'm scared here, could this also be sacred? And if I am thinking that this thing is evil, is it possible that's a veil, a layer, a protective barrier? And again, we can then be informed with what we're investigating, what we're noticing. We can then be informed and listen to that deep instinct that says, I'm going to look a little closer because I feel it's in my best interest to do so, or this is my boundary here. I don't need to look at this any further. I'm very clear where I stand on this. I don't think there's anything necessarily here more I can learn from it because I'm open. I'm not triggered. I'm aware, and that's my full stop. And I think we're also losing a little bit of that in the world today, where we're not giving ourselves permission to recognize that we can be informed differently. We can be informed. Our instincts, our intuition, the thing that really tells us when to keep going in the dark wood, when to take shelter, when to find an ally. I think that looks different for each of us at a different phase within these experiences. And we get so quick to judge what we're seeing someone else doing instead of going, what does my intuition really say about this? Am I judging them because I'm scared? Well, then now in my mind, I can go back to that idea of what's sacred to me. Am I projecting because this thing I'm calling evil is so out of context from my morals, my values. And that's good to know, right? It's good to know when something's crossed a boundary or a line and we go, no, that's not for me. But instead of calling it evil, why can't we just say, full stop, no. Like, where did we have to get into this demonizing of things? So I think that I love this, where the conversation about monster kind of opened us into this other territory, because I think a lot of us fear the unknown, because these are sort of maybe the hidden elements for some of us that are also lurking in that same territory, where we know that buried treasure is, that magic is. But what if they're not separate? What if it's as simple as, I can go in there knowing, sure, there might be some monsters, but if I am really connected to my instincts and my intuition, that doesn't mean I'm always vulnerable to those monsters and I can get that treasure. But I think what we do is we just think, there's maybe my treasure's in there, but so are the monsters. So I'm not even going to look. I'm not even going to explore. I'm just going to keep feeling this discomfort or these symptoms or these things, and never let myself go beyond that, because I'm not giving myself permission to, or, something around that. But that's what's coming to me as we're exploring.
I love this, and I love how you started to touch on the other side of the exploration. And when we're talking about cultivating this connection within, like, yes, doing the show, and I think that's what happens at the beginning, right? Like, we are kind of, we don't know where to go, we don't know how to do this, we don't know. So having somebody that actually guides us is paramount, and somebody that guides us afterwards as well, because we tend, and that's been my experience, that's the experience that I've actually seen as well, is we tend to at some point push,
Mm,
and we go into this other direction instead of saying, hold on a second, like, I don't, you were touching on this, like, I can have all the willpower to, like, go, 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 but at the same time, I need to know when, and I pull at scabs here. Am I, like, going in where I don't need, am I just opening all the doors just because, like, I know how to open doors? Like, am
right?
I
Or I'm
doing this
addicted
for
to
the,
it.
yeah, exactly. Like, am I doing this, like, just because I want to prove that I can do this? Or am I really, really connected with who I am and where I am and what the message that is coming up right now? I need to listen and figure out, like, that one, but not necessarily having it. And this is where, like, there's a balance that I just love about this work, which is, at first you're coming out of your comfort zone, going into that darkness or shadow work, and you find, things that have been like keys and codes of, like, past behaviors that you're releasing. You were talking about, like, what needs to, we're releasing it, those ghosts that are lingering, right? But at the same time, like, if there's no ghost, stop going further like, there's a balance that I think, and I see, like, it's either or. And again, we're like black and white, we're
Right.
like going one swing the other way or swing the other way, and this is like, it doesn't have to be this. And it really is always, okay, what is my body, what is my mind, what is my heart, what is my soul telling me right now? Am I going, or am I stopping? And if I'm stopping, if I'm not going, am I going for the right reason for me?
Right.
Am I going because I'm scared, or am I not going because I'm sacred? And this is where I just love that you were saying this, because we can swing both ways, and both ways is not helpful when it's the pendulum that is all. So having this connection, and this is always going back to connection to your body, connection to your mind, connection to your heart, connection to your soul. Like, it doesn't matter what the subject that I'm bringing on this podcast or anywhere else, if you're not connected with yourself,
Yeah.
then of course you're going to go. And it's easy to say when you are connected, because we have been, we've experienced it. I think, well, most of us have experienced, like, and experience in ways that are not necessarily always um healthy. And I'm air quoting again, like, in a sense that it's, at the end of the day, that it is healthy, because you're reeling yourself back and you're like, hold on a second, like, I got caught up into, like, this direction or that direction. But at the same time, like, I just really need to bring this where shadow work is so paramount, but it doesn't have to be, like, painful, like, in the sense, like, see what I mean? Like you can choose when you're not. And sometimes it just happens that it's just right now, my nervous system needs to be regulated before I even go somewhere, before I do something, before I like, so having that honoring where we are, giving ourselves that grace and protecting that sacredness within. I just love how you brought this in, because I don't think that we talk about that other side that much in this work.
Yeah, it's everything you're saying, everything you're saying. We never know what our shadow work is consciously. We're kind of just, I mean, we can be very intentional. I think that's different, right? We
Mm.
can be intentional about goals, desires, wanting to shift a pattern or habit. But often it's also the knowing the soul's leading us through these experiences. And one of the greatest things we can do is cultivate that inner knowing, that connection. Something that this came about, I think it was maybe close to 2 years ago now. I can't remember where I came across this concept, but it was life changing for me. And the concept essentially was, that this idea of building confidence. That was like this, I had this very intentional desire to build more confidence. And I would think about like, what is more confident? I want to be a confident speaker. I want to be more confident in my work. And when I started to break that down and sit with what does that even mean? Like, do I even know what confidence is if I were to give it a form or an actual definition? And then I came across something. This is the life changing part of it for me was it confidence to cultivate confidence. If we break down the word confidence, it can mean in trust. I was like, oh my gosh, that shifts everything. I was thinking of confidence as this ominous external force that I had to grab a hold of that was just going to make me a better something person, speaker, leader, teacher, healer, whatever. I was like, no, if I think of confidence just meaning I do this thing, this act, this what have you, in trust, it changed it all. And I went, oh my gosh, if I just really focus on, am I trusting my voice in this moment? Am I trusting what I'm saying, what I'm doing without needing to know how it's going to land, how it's going to be perceived? If I'm just so deeply committed to doing and sharing and speaking and teaching from this place of my knowing that I have something to offer. It's not even about value or worth but just this deep knowing that it's enough. Then I'm doing that in confidence. And that started to help me reframe some of these ideas of what it means to really be guided by that inner voice, that inner knowing. Because this world does have a way of humbling us. And unfortunately, for many of us, especially women, and I'm not trying to, say it again, it doesn't happen to men. I primarily attract a lot of women or those who identify as women in my work, right? So it's easier to kind of speak to that part of the psyche. But confidence is something that's sometimes seen in its physicality, or it's something that is, when it relates to intuition as we go through this world, it's dismissed quite often because it's also associated with feelings. Well, I feel this way. And maybe that feeling is a deep knowing or intuition, but it's easy for it to be dismissed by others. Like, oh, it's just your feeling. Well, that's not solid. That's not concrete. That's not good enough. We need evidence. Well, this feeling is my evidence. And me trusting in this feeling is my demonstrating my confidence in myself. So I like to kind of weave that in to this because it is a foundation. It's a foundational piece for me. My favorite fairy tale is Vasilisa the Beautiful. I go back and forth between Vasilisa the Beautiful and Little Red Riding Hood. And I think that both of those tales over my life experience have come back to the restoration and redemption of the intuitive quality and being able to work that, to share that, to help others cultivate it. And in those stories, there's often a denial of that. There's usually a wounding, a separation where it's lacerated in this weird way. It's like it's inhibited, it's put to the test. Are we going to pay attention to what we're seeing, sensing, feeling, but not seeing with our physical eyes? I call it sacred sight, right? That inner sight. Are we sensing the truth? Are we looking to get validated with our visible eyes? And in Little Red Riding Hood, when she first really senses the wolf on the path, it depends on the retelling of the tale, but in some versions of the tale, she actually meets the wolf on the path first in plain sight in the
Mhm.
woods. And often it is said that people that are malevolent, I'm not going to say evil, but just with not the best interests, let's say, they will show us who they are. Maybe not physically, but on some level, they will show us who they are through their language, through something they say. And if we're paying attention to that, we'll take note of it. And it doesn't mean we're always in danger or to walk through this world with fear. But those types of tales remind us to redeem those qualities, and they are essential for navigating this world. And that back to disorientation, I think that's something we're taught as we're tumbling and falling and being tossed about and not knowing what's happening. We're learning to cultivate that inner knowing. I'll be okay. I'll land on my feet. I'll find a way. And also, it is beneficial for us to be deeply attuned to our emotional states so that we can sense it in others, so that we become better and more welcoming to cultivating our skills and gifts and talents around recognizing manipulation and deceit. And I say that because often in the spiritual world or in personal development communities, there's like, oh, no, no, we need to talk positive and high vibe and stay away from that. That doesn't mean we're welcoming any of that into our life. When you're deeply attuned to it, you spot it, you sense it, you can redirect. Sometimes you're meant to contend with those forces. But those fairy tales are my favorite because they don't hide from those difficult truths. They remind us the ways that we have been dismissed, dishonored, gathered the bones, recollected ourselves, and came out in the end in a different way. And so I love that you're coming back to that connection, body, mind, heart, soul connection. That reminds me of that the intuition. And we can do things with confidence, which really just means I'm going to do this with trust in myself in this way. And guess what? If it doesn't work, if it doesn't go the way we wanted it to, that's not a failure. Sometimes we're meant to be let off the path. So we discover a different ally or form of support or a new gift, skill, or talent, which is why also the shadow sometimes emerges in our lives in ways that seems very confusing. But it's that disorientation or separation or severance of an experience, a loss of some kind that often will reorient us to a deeper truth. So it's interesting when we start to kind of lead our lives from that way of I'm just going to move with confidence and see where I'm led next.
Well, that's when we're talking about the no matter what happens, I know I'm going to be okay, right? Like that trust that it is innate. And one piece that I said earlier, like there's two things that came up, and I was actually going to let it go, the second piece, but now that you're bringing this, I'm like, this is my cue. I have lived all my life with anxiety. I come from parents that are actually like anxious people, that are controlling people, and I've learned to operate in that. And when my mother passed away, I actually had a car accident. There was a lot, like I fell through like that old disorientation once again. And, through all of that, I've, it, the anxiety was pathologized and medicated for years. And one day I decided that, I didn't want, and I'm not against medication at all. I'm just like you were saying, like there is a place and a time for that. But I was like, what if that anxiety is not what I think it is? What if the anxiety is actually like a message for me to, and it happened I actually dropped an audio in one of my container last week. When anxiety rears its ears in my life, I hadn't been medicated in years. Instead of going in the mind and saying, oh my God, like something and gripping and something, and there I have to control everything and everything, I actually go back to myself and I say, hold on a second. I feel, and I actually really feel that we can sense things resonating through time, like, because time doesn't exist. It's just a construct of that's a different story. But so I feel the nearing of something that is going to require me, not for battle, but it's going to require me to be present, connected in trust I can have those tools. So instead of having all this energy that I was having trying to control, I reel myself back in. And that for me changed, like when you were saying like the in trust, the confidence, like that it changed, it was life changing. My version of that was this. And I haven't been medicated because when I have those, it was called anxiety, I actually call them like distortion in my timeline that is reminding me or sending me a message, right? An omen, like you were saying, sending me a message that something is going to require me to be all there and all present, and to kind of like make sure that I am well fed, well rested, well everything, like not to be like this combative person, but to welcome whatever is coming and to trust that I'm going to navigate this. And I just love that you brought the Red Riding Hood, because we tend to take it literal, right? Like there's this little girl and there's the mom that said, you stay down the path. And then there's this wolf, and then there's the grandma. But what if all that was like just sides and identities of our own being, right? Like that's why I love that you brought that in, because mom said that I need to stay on the path. I've been conditioned to stay on the path. And if we're stepping out of the path into the shadow and listen to that voice, so it's really interesting how you brought it in another way, that confidence where like we need to know, we need to trust that we know.
Right.
We need to trust that we know. We already know.
Yes.
We already know. We already know.
I love that. I love how you connected that way, and that important point too, that where you said, that these can all be constructs of us. I think it's so important, because that's another way we can break down a fairy tale or a story and look at it and say, the mother saying, don't go off the path. Where is that voice in my head? Is that authority? Is that something telling me whatever? Is that my voice and my inner critic? And then we can look at the wolf too. And okay, and when you mentioned, well, what if we do go off path? Well, then can it be purposeful? Can it be leading us into new territory? Or are we going to default into guilt or shame for not following the rules? Like there's so many things that get
Yes.
sparked when these elements are present on the path. And that's why it's so rich. It's so symbolically rich and personal. We'll all see different things in the wolf. We'll all see different things in, I was explaining this to one of the women I work with is an analyst, and she's helped me tremendously. And we call it sifting and sorting. And in fairy tales, there's often these ordeals and tasks and things that we have to get through. We don't like them. They're not fun. They're not enjoyable. Sometimes we want to give up and throw in the towel and just act as if it's not happening or go unconscious. But in the fairy tales, they're sifting and sorting. So like Cinderella has to take the lentils out of the ash. She's given this horrible task by the wicked stepmother. And that's the only way she can go to the ball, is if she does this. She cries, she throws herself on the ground. She's like going through all these different, different stages of grief. And I can't do it. And it's impossible. And then she calls on the allies, her invisible support, the divine force, and the dove comes in and the birds come in and they help sift the lentils from the ash. So I tell people now, when they're going through something really challenging or traumatic or unknown, it's okay to be sifting and sorting. It's okay to not know where you are, what's coming, how you're going to get through, what's on the other side. But there is a process underway. And sometimes it's the only thing we can know to be true, is there is a process underway. So I sometimes just offer that too, for people that are feeling really afraid or uncertain. And so, yeah, I was going through this sifting and sorting of myself and realizing the wolf, I wanted to identify the wolf as a individual, like who in my life is the wolf and means this thing. And then one time while listening to the tale not long ago, I went, oh my gosh, the wolf is all of them. All of the people, all of the moments, and I looked at it that day through that lens. And then the
Mm.
next day realizing, and I can choose again that the wolf maybe today is my problem, my struggle. So I love that about this type of work is we don't have to confine it to a process that's so literal. This is why every time you listen to a story or a tale, it can not only change meaning, but also be applied differently based on whatever it is you're going through. And for really difficult subjects for people, trauma, there's so many, not about comparing our traumas, but, there certainly are some circumstances that are so unfathomable. I've heard stories over the years from doing this work where I honestly, after a client would share and I'd get off the call, I would just bawl. I would just cry. My heart would just feel so heavy. I was so in awe and inspired of their journey, what they've been through, but I could feel like, how could that even happen to a person? Those kind of things. And what I realized is these fairy tales can be medicine in that regard, where they really help someone contend with something that we can't make logical sense of. No matter what we do, there's some circumstances, especially if I work a lot with these more intense subjects, because people don't want to talk about death or murder, manipulation, all that like really heavy, intense stuff. But we're living it. People are living these things. And so the fairy tales give a way of, they don't force you to see a silver lining in an impossible situation, but they can help give a canvas for something to be experienced differently. And sometimes it will just give a different purpose to the story. It'll uncover a little bit of a meaning of a certain thing. It might help someone gain trust again and moving forward, or forgiveness, or whatever it is. But what I love is it doesn't force us to have an agenda with our struggle. We can be with our turmoil, our struggle, our afflictions in a way that's so human, but has that sacredness built into it. And I just think that's such a gift for those of us that really are not able to put our situation into a box that makes sense or has an ending that's perfect or
Yeah.
wonderful. And that's something else the fairy tales speak to is not all of them end well, but there's
Most of
still,
them don't if they're not Disneyed.
yeah, there could be something there of value,
Yes.
even if it doesn't have the happily ever after at the end of it.
Oh, I just love this. Um, yeah, because I think that the fairy tales are so. What I heard was that it's enough of a framework, and you were saying canvas. It's enough of a framework for our mind to grasp, and enough of spaciousness for the unconscious or the messages to come forward. And that is a beautiful bridge in between, the two. And that's why, like, when I read that you were doing this type of work with fairy tale, I was like, oh my, it's so cool. Melissa, that was amazing. Thank you so, so much for coming on the Walk With Me podcast and share what you do and have this conversation with me. I just feel like a kindred spirit, and I just
Yes.
love, love, love that it's sometimes very lonely to be outside of those boxes, but when we find kindred spirit, and that's what you were saying, like, do I trust that I have something to bring, no matter if, like, the point is not to be liked, and the point is not to be like in the consensus. The point is to actually, like, what is my truth, and how do I walk with that truth? And again, it's another thing where we're so afraid to step outside because we might find ourselves alone. But at the same time, for me and my experience, and it's probably for you as well, being in a feeling alone in a room full of people is much worse than actually that liminal space. I just love that you love that, because that's part of my brand, the liminal space where I'm stepping outside of that path and walking in trust. I am going to find people that are actually also stepping out of that path, where that connection and that depth of work, it's just magical. And then we're going back to finding the goal, leveraging the magic, and connecting in ways that were, that we didn't even think were possible. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you so, so much.
Oh, well, thank you. I think of us as like the mystical misfits, you know, it's like we just carving our own way, and it can be lonely and isolating, but all of a sudden then you just open up to this new territory and discover someone else along the way. And it's like, oh my gosh, they get it and they get me and I get them. And this is so wonderful. And that point to being we wouldn't be able to find each other if we didn't try, right?
Mhm.
If we didn't put ourselves out
Yep.
there or to do the work or to show up, like that's the way we'll encounter the others. We've got to put ourselves out there into that dark forest, you know, go into the cave, find your way through, and there's others there waiting. You know,
Yep.
they're patiently and they're just patiently waiting to be discovered and to be met. And it's such a beautiful thing to think about. It's amazing to think about there are parts of us that we haven't met yet within ourselves and others in the world
Mm,
too. And that's
mm.
another part of shadow work that's like my favorite thing. There's so much we haven't discovered and it gets to be amazing and wonderful. And yeah, this is just such a beautiful manifestation of that exact thing. Just say yes and show up, and you never know what's going to happen.
You never know what's gonna happen, and you were just talking and a whole bunch of doors just open, and I'm like, "You have to come back. We have to
Yes,
continue this conversation."
I would love that.
That is I just love it. So thank you so much, Melissa, for being with us. I will link all the ways to get in contact with you in the show note. There's also something that I saw that you have free to if people are interested in starting this work or dipping their toe and see like, where that comes from. So I'll link that as well because that is actually like a free is it a class or it's a yeah.
Yeah, it's a quiz, the shadow
Yes.
work functions. So yeah, you can take the free quiz and then you'll get assigned a little brief mini fairy tale to work with based on your results.
Perfect. So I will link that too. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Listeners, watchers, because now it's on YouTube. If you're not subscribed on the YouTube channel, I'm going to encourage you to do so. So, listeners, watchers, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast, comments, liking, sharing, all the good things. And I see you, I feel you, and I love you so deeply. Till the next time.